Thank you for attending the 2020 Sunstone Digital Symposium Session 363 titled Mormonism and Community. The audio from this session will be available for purchase at sunstone.org after the symposium. The video recording of this session will be available in the Whova app for the remainder of 2020. Please type your questions into the Whova app to be addressed during the Q&A at the end of this session. At Sunstone, we are making it a goal to build a community that allows many ways for people to express their faith. Our tagline is, "There is more than one way to Mormon." We invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. About this presentation. The Mormon Church can be a very comfortable community for many people. Some people stay in the church because of the community. Many who leave struggle to find a new community. This panel explores the topic of community in the broader spectrum of Mormonism, whether in or out of the church. I'll take a second to introduce you to our speakers before we begin. Dallin Johnson recently graduated magna cum laude from Utah State University with degrees in economics and international business. He moved to Washington, D.C., where he works with a nonprofit that is dedicated to helping people understand, use, and shape the law. Like Brian Stevenson, he believes that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done, and hopes to use his education and experience to help people find access to justice. In the Mormon community, Dallin is a nomad of sorts who has navigated years of skepticism, doubt, and disbelief, and finally landed in a place he's comfortable, grateful for his Mormon upbringing and believing family members and friends, but thrilled with the purpose-driven life he is living outside the bounds of organized religion. Dallin is an outdoor enthusiast and spends much of his free time biking, skiing, attending concerts, and conversing over brunch. Anthony D. Miller has 2 master's degrees, one in business administration and one in financial services and planning. He is a financial planning entrepreneur for real estate development companies. He has spent 7 years as an adjunct finance professor and holds 8 professional designations related to comprehensive financial and estate planning. He spent most of the last 20 years as either a stake high counselor, a high priest group leader or assistant, a ward mission leader, or as a gospel doctrine teacher until May 2016, when his adult son came out as gay. In an effort to find resources to support his son, Anthony stumbled across difficult LDS Church history that resulted in a loss of belief in the LDS Church and its teachings regarding LGBTQ individuals. He and his gay son are now out of the LDS Church, while his wife and adult daughter are fully active believing members. Anthony is a regular contributor on social media support groups on topics of faith transition and mixed faith marriages and families. He blogs at www.unpackingambiguity.com. Nicholas R. Stewart is originally from California and now resides in Baltimore, Maryland, where he works as a transit planner. He is no longer an active, believing member of the LDS Church, even though he is active in transitioning, ex- and post-Mormon social media groups. Nicholas is a fan of forums like Sunstone, where people can share their stories and experiences. All right, I'll now pass the floor to our presenters, and I believe that Nicholas is going to go ahead and get started first.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everybody. Checking my clock. I'm on the East Coast, but I'm pretty sure it's afternoon for all of us, or at least most of us. So my name is Nick. I kind of borrowing from Lindsay Hansen Park's Your Polygamy podcast. I'll start by kind of talking about my Mormon cred. I was more or less born and raised in the church. I was adopted as an infant, but I basically was raised and born in the church. Southern California, not Los Angeles, not a little farther north, a place called Santa Barbara. People probably heard of it. But I grew up there as a biracial Mormon kid in a not very Mormon city. And did most of the normal Mormon things up until I kind of went inactive as a teenager, thereby avoiding a mission. But I went back to church when my early mid-20s, met my wife, got married in the temple. I've served in 4 elders quorum presidencies, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think it's probably 5 or so years ago now, I stopped going to church for the second time in my life. It's sticking so far. We'll see if it goes. I honestly don't know where I'm going to land in the future, but we take it as it goes. So the topic of community is an interesting one. If we were all there in person and I could see all your faces, I'd probably have everyone like raise their hand if they feel that there is a good sense of community within the church, just kind of generally speaking. And I think most people would raise their hands. I think most people in the church or who have been in the church can acknowledge and have seen that within a ward, within a stake, even if it's just within Relief Society or within like a priesthood quorum, there often is some sense of community, whether or not it's like it's inclusive for everybody or not, is another story. But there is often at least some sense of community, and I think that one of the many issues that I think people kind of face when they start to realize that this community that they are in the church, that they enjoy the community aspect, but maybe they don't enjoy everything else that goes along with being in the church and being part of that community. I myself was fairly fortunate. I lived in California like literally my entire life until I moved to the East Coast 3 years ago. I was in the Bay Area. I was in the Oakland area when I stopped attending church. I was in a great ward. I mean, I started attending church for a while. Without wearing the normal church attire, I was like, for a while it was like jeans and a polo, and then at some point it was like a t-shirt and shorts, because it's California, it's what you do. As Anthony has heard me say several times, I mean, I used to bring coffee to church sometimes and sit in the foyer and drink it. So I was able to do that with essentially zero direct backlash. I have no idea what people were saying about me behind my back, but I never caught wind of it. No one ever treated me any different as a result. I certainly felt very strongly a community in that ward. It's one of the reasons I continued attending as long as I did. I think that when you leave the church, or even when you're in, the early stages of transitioning out, or making the decision to stop attending, I think it's difficult for a lot of folks when it comes to community. I think that it's probably harder when you're in a place like Utah, where, quote unquote, everyone around you is Mormon, because you're just generally less likely to have non-Mormon acquaintances already. For me, I've rarely had a case where I would consider that most of my friends are Mormon or people from church. And I think that really it was right before I stopped attending church that it's probably the one time in my life where most of the socialization time that I had outside of even just attending church itself was with other Mormons. But communities, community in a sense of belonging, having people that get you, that's important to us as humans. And so I think it's difficult when the community that you've had, particularly when it's been one that, in most cases, you don't have to work to try to get the community that is your ward. You're like, you live in your ward, you attend church, you're part of the community kind of by default. Whether or not you engage with them as much is, a little different, and it's kind of, up to individuals, but, you're part of the ward, generally speaking, right? So when you're faced with the prospect of, I'm not going to have that anymore, what do you do? And I've been fortunate to have been involved in some great social media groups that basically help with that, right? So there are some groups on Facebook that I've been a part of through the years. Some I am still part of, some I've left, some not by choice. But there's I think finding people who, especially when you're transitioning and you're going through all of the mental and emotional and in some cases even physical ups and downs that go with having a faith transition, having a faith crisis or faith journey. It's great to have people that you can communicate with about these things, people who get it because they've been there. And so I think that in that vein, I feel like it's good for people to not only have outlets like on Facebook, for example, or like Reddit, if the Ex-Mormon subreddit is your thing. But in-person groups are great too. That's not the direction I've trended. I like to be able to cut off my interactions with people a little easier than, hey, you're standing in front of me, I can't walk away from you, it's rude. But I think it's important, and I suspect that Anthony will be mentioning some of the in-person community resources that I know he's been involved in various ways. But yeah, I think for now I just kind of want to leave it with that. Just kind of the importance of community, specific, like especially when you're coming out of kind of the automatic community that is being in a Mormon ward or a Mormon stake, and just kind of like how you find that somewhere else. And I'll go ahead and turn over to Anthony now, and I'm sure he'll have a PowerPoint for us.
I do. All right, so in addition to some of the things that Nick shared about how when we have a community, we have a sense of belonging and protection, family, it's pre-programmed in the church. And when we go through a faith reorientation or deconstruction or whatever it is that you want to call it, we often end up losing that sense of safety or belonging in our community. And so there's a couple questions that I'd ask you to sit with, and I'll let you know that I have quite a few slides that I'm going to share fairly quickly. And so you don't need to worry about keeping track of everyone, because I'm going to upload this to my blog, unpackingambiguity.com, so you can spend more time with them. But I'd ask people who are seeking community, what are some of the reasons they're looking for that? And first I'd ask, what were the things that nourished us or nourished you personally in your believing community? Was it that you were an extrovert and you liked teaching, and so you had opportunities to teach? Was it the experience of singing together? Was it service opportunities? Was it an experience of belief affirmation, that you could share things that were very sacred and important to you and then have a bunch of other people affirm that kind of belief? So put in some work, spend some time getting curious about really what were those things that really nourished you the most in your community. And what I think what you'll find is that in many cases, some of the things that nourished you the most in your believing community can be the kinds of places or activities or things that you can experience nourishment in post-Orthodox communities. And so if you were really nourished by doing service types of activities, maybe in an in-person or online community or whatnot, outside of your traditionally Orthodox community, you can do Secret Santa or Sub for Santa kind of things. You can do get creative in terms of figuring out what kind of projects and service work that you're going to do. You can you get to choose who you minister to instead of by assignment, if there's, and they don't have to be a member or somebody that you end up working with. So put in the work and really get curious about what your core values are and how that connects into the things that that nourished you. This is an exercise that the person who co-leads our local Mormon Spectrum group with me, Sarah Hughes-Zabawa, prepared. It's a spiritual values exercise where you go through and circle the ones that really resonate with you and then narrow them down to the top 3, and then get curious about what are the types of activities that you can do in your life that connect the most with your core spiritual values. And then the next step in the exercise is, whether you're in a small group or whether it's with your believing family or if you're in a mixed faith marriage, having your spouse go through this to find out where there might be crossover. Maybe you don't have crossover in your top 3, but maybe your number 5 is your spouse's, number 2 or something like that, and spend some time on those kinds of things. When we find community, one thing that's really helped me is secular Buddhism and writings from Eckhart Tolle, which are basically secular Buddhism. And what he suggests is that in our first part of our life, we conflate our sense of identity with attachment to form. And that includes our beliefs, and that includes our community. Maya Angelou talks about, and Brene Brown in her book, Braving the Wilderness, spends some time with this idea that we are only free when we realize that we belong no specific place or no place. You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great. A lot of times, I think when we're seeking out community, whether it's online or in person, one of the great drivers to that is because it's such a significant part of our sense of identity. I wrote a blog post about this from earlier this year. I had this underlying desire to reconnect to a spiritual community, but I needed it to be a community that was not a fundamentalist, literalistic community. And I had this underlying desire to do that. And as I put in more work, I understood, at least for me in my personal experience, that it wasn't about engaging in a community where I can plug in and do service and so forth, but really I was going through this disattachment to form and this sense that my community is my identity. And so now I can experience belonging, at least that's my experience, in a variety of different places. I can belong nowhere and everywhere at the same time. When you're seeking for in-person communities, there's a number of different ways you can do that. The Mormon Spectrum website has in-person map and directory that you can go to. Then you can search around the globe for different communities that have decided to list themselves on the Mormon Spectrum website. That doesn't mean that they're all active, and certainly this isn't all of them, but it's a very helpful tool. If you drill down to Billings, Montana, you'll find our Mormon Spectrum Yellowstone County group that I created, and Sarah Hughes-Zabawa co-leads with me. What we did for this group then is we created a Facebook invitation page on this side right here. So if someone goes to the Mormon Spectrum website and they click on that link, it's going to take them to a private group invitation page that we did. So somebody can come and choose to join the group, and then I can vet them as well to see if that's if they're a good fit. We don't want to put anyone in faith crisis. I also created an entity page that is the Mormon Spectrum Yellowstone County page that people can find us on, and occasionally I'll share things like I did a video discussion with Lindsay Hansen Park earlier in July. Next. Then we also then, after we vetted people, we invite them into our secret privacy level group. So no one can find the group unless they're invited into the group. They have to be a Facebook friend with either me or Sarah in order to be invited into the group. And one of the things that we did so that people can get a feel for the group is we did a 12-day challenge toward the end of last year, where we went through a number of different questions, and we have that as a pinned topic. So someone that's new that comes into the group can click on that topic of 12-day challenge and look at how we answered some different questions to get a feel or a tone for the group. Also, on Ex-Mormon Reddit, there's a pinned post every week that gets updated for a weekend or a virtual meetup. And so if I'm traveling somewhere, or if I know that locally we're going to be doing a Sunday morning meetup in Billings at a local coffee house or something, I'll have that posted. Now, because of COVID, a lot of these meetups are virtual. And so you might not be in a locality where there is an in-person meetup, but because of COVID, you can join some of these Sunday meetups, and you can find people that way on Ex-Mormon Reddit. One thing that really helped me as I was looking for community is I was looking for churches where I could use words like, or names like Bart Ehrman, or I could talk about the documentary hypothesis or deal with non-literalism. And a local priest in one of the mainline churches who I spoke with, he says, well, what you need to do is you need to go to gaychurch.org, and you need to search for churches in your community, because if you have a church that is openly and actively affirming to the LGBTQ community, and if on top of that they even have a female pastor, they have developed a degree of nuance that you're quite likely to be able to sit in a Sunday school class and talk about the degree to which Matthew chapter 2 is historical or not, and the implications of the documentary hypothesis, and not be considered a heretic. Another place that you can go is the Liturgist podcast also has a Liturgist community. And so they have kind of a message board like the old blogosphere kind of thing that you can go to. And then if you join Patreon and you support the Liturgist podcast, they also are doing Sunday meetups as well. After I did my Mormon Stories interview, I got contacted from an evangelical or a Episcopalian priest who was in a faith transition, and I directed him to, there's a group as part of the Liturgist podcast of ecclesiastical leaders that were going through faith transition that can provide support. Meetup.com, you can look up, your local humanist groups. You can look at other kinds of groups that might provide you some support, what you're looking for. Third Space Studios in Provo, I think, has lost its lease because they weren't raising enough money with what was going on with COVID. But hopefully when things open back up, that'll be a place for people that are in Utah County. John Ogden would do a periodic meetup. It was like the third Sunday of every month there, and he called it Move Upward. And so as things open up in Utah County, those of you who are there that are looking for an in-person discussion group or support community, I'd highly recommend friending or following John Ogden. Thomas McConkie also has the Lower Lights School of Wisdom. It's out of Salt Lake City. They do periodically do meetups, but because of COVID now, they do a once a month evening Zoom meeting. The Thrive Community Group is a private group that you can join on Facebook. They have periodic events and they have local groups and chapters, and they've taken a lot of really great material from Natasha Helfer and John DeLynn from their Faith Crisis support groups, and they include that in some of their meetups. They also are doing Wednesday Zoom meetups, and in those kinds of groups you can often find people who are local to you. If you go to Facebook and look for events and discover events, you can choose, next weekend and choose the category. If you're looking for some sort of spiritual community that's non-literalist, the Unity Church is an example of one that's not very literal. And Community of Christ, the Toronto congregation, they do broadcasts as well. And so there's all sorts of things that you can do that are in person or on Zoom or Facebook or whatnot, like things like that. Some of the things that I would share, what we do in our local Mormon Spectrum group is we have a standing meetup one evening per month. And we also, before COVID, had a standing for anyone that wanted to show up, like a Sunday morning coffee meetup where we visit. If somebody's encountering something that's kind of difficult, you know, maybe they do a post in our secret group and they say, I'm dealing with a challenge with, you know, one of my children is hitting a milestone, whether it's a baptism or an ordination or something like that. I'd like to meet up. And so, you know, some months we might get together, you know, a few of us more frequently than others, just kind of depends on what's going on. Oftentimes we'll do like a Sunday meetup if it's a state conference weekend or if it's a general conference weekend. If we have someone in our group who is particularly grieving something or they want to figure something out, Allison Udall is one of the individuals who helped start the Mormon Spectrum website, and she's actually out of Bozeman, Montana. And before I created a group in Billings, like I traveled to Bozeman, Montana to meet up with the Big Sky Mormon Spectrum group so I could spend some time and visit with the group there. And she has a lot of wisdom and experience over the years supporting people. And one example that she gave is that when people are initially going through a faith transition and they're trying to reconstruct or reorder, you know, what their behavioral boundaries are, what they consider is moral and what's good, and maybe they decide that it's not the end of the world if someone drinks a glass of wine with dinner or they want to try a beer or something like that. But at the same time, it can be very precarious if someone is processing a deep sense of grief due to a deconstruction of faith and a loss of identity and things like that, and loss of community. Maybe they're ostracized by their family. It can be a problem to try to figure out alcohol consumption the way the rest of the world sometimes does, you know, in their college years where they drink too much and make mistakes. Like that can cause a problem if you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s and you do that. And so being able to have a group of people that you can have discussions with about those kinds of things. So you can figure out, you know, how much is too much or things like that. A lot of really tender discussions you can have in support groups and community in terms of, you know, if you teach your children nuance, and so they know that there wasn't a 600-year-old man who built a boat and put a zoo in it, but it's a metaphor, it's a story. Like you can teach nuance and stuff like that to your kids, but sometimes that's going to create problems because if they're in a seminary class that's very literalistic and all their friends are treating that as a literal historical story, that can sometimes place your children as the out people in the group because they're not buying into that literalism. So being able to have those kinds of discussions, I would say probably one of the most helpful discussions we've had in our local Mormon Spectrum group. We got together, we wore masks and social distanced and everything, and we had some people participate by Zoom during our July evening meetup. Was we had a discussion that a lot of human beings, what we really long for is a sense of connection and authenticity, where we can sit and have a discussion and ask the difficult questions and share the very difficult concerns and not be policed. And when you experience a differentiation or a change of belief, sometimes it's not safe to do that with your Orthodox believing family anymore. So certainly people have different experiences in terms of trying to continue to attend church without having literal Orthodox belief. And so that might be difficult because a lot of people, when they go to church, one of the values or the things that feeds them is belief affirmation. And so if people are starting to share narratives or stories that are outside of affirming their belief, that can be pretty difficult. And when you can have a group, it tends to be better, I think, if it's a smaller group, like maybe max 15 people at a time, where you can really have an intimate discussion and have really vulnerable discussions and ask very difficult questions, but know that everybody else in the group is going to support you and unconditionally love you and validate your experience, whether or not they agree with it or not. Like in our spectrum group, we have active, nuanced believing members with temple recommends, and we have resigned people who are still angry, and we have everything in between. And a good percentage of us are in mixed belief marriages. Some people find value in Buddhism or in other kind of belief systems. But in our group, you know that you're going to be unconditionally loved and supported and validated, and you can ask the difficult questions and we will hear you, and you're not going to be policed in that circumstance. So I think that, at least my perception is that as human beings, we desire that. And when we process something that's very difficult, you know, like that causes a significant amount of grief, that having support groups, including in-person support groups, can be vital for that experience. You know, when someone loses a spouse or loses a loved one, grief support groups can be very, very, very helpful to be among other people that are processing some similar things. There are groups like Alcoholics Anonymous that, you know, if you go to an AA group, you know, the basic idea is that you're going to validate and love and support the people that are there, even if they just totally screwed up. Like you're going to be there for them. And I think that's what people are looking for. And when they get on the outside of the traditional belief affirmation narrative of Orthodox belief, they're really often searching for that. Sometimes it's for their sense of identity, like I initially mentioned, and sometimes it's just that they want a sense of connection and emotional intimacy. One member in our group expressed that the most significant value that he gets in our group is not just when he's able to be fully authentic and vulnerable in his conversations, but that he gets to witness other people having that experience. So in any event, those are the things that I wanted to share. And I'll pass it on to Dallin. And you need to unmute. You got your video, but you need to unmute.
Ah, there we go. Okay, yeah, sorry. Just trying to get I have a few slides to share. Where was the button to present?
Share screen.
Share screen, is that? Oh, there we go. Okay. Perfect. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Anthony and Nick. I'm excited to be presenting today on Mormonism and community, just because this is a topic that's pretty dear to my heart. I think largely because community is what kept me active in the church for as long as it did. Community is what allowed me to navigate my faith journey safely as I went through my transition out of church activity. And communities both within and without Mormonism have catalyzed my being able to thrive since my transition. And I think for a lot of reasons, just because I've been really fortunate to have a lot of wonderful people in my life. But I think part of it as well is kind of just along my whole journey, being able to recognize and surround myself with people who lift me up, where and will meet me wherever I'm at, and kind of a conscious effort to surround myself with those kinds of people. So first, a little bit of background on myself. So I was born and raised mostly in Utah, although my family and I lived in Southern California in Valencia for a couple years while I was in elementary school. Graduated high school in Utah and did a year at Utah State University before taking a couple years off to serve a mission in Durban, South Africa. And I spoke about my faith transition at Sunstone last year. But in a nutshell, I had been a skeptical semi-believer a lot of my life, and had a lot of questions and doubts both during my mission and after that I wrestled with for a while, and ultimately made the tough decision to withdraw from church activity. Graduated from Utah State in 2018. Withdrew from church activity about a year before that, and then moved to DC after I graduated, and I work at a nonprofit now, which I absolutely love. And so I guess with my presentation today, the only real reason I have slides is just to kind of put faces with names with a lot of the people that have kind of been with me throughout my journey. And first and foremost is my family, who have been just absolutely incredible through everything. I'm the only one of my immediate family that is no longer active. And I think my mom took my transitioning out of the church especially hard, which I think is understandable, just because when you, with something like this, it has consequences not just for this life, but for the life to come. And if you have a son that's not going to be getting married in the temple, for example, that can be devastating. But overall, my family has been great. At one point, my sister Kylie asked me point blank, just like, "Hey, why did you leave the church?" And which was a tough question to answer, but I wrote a piece called "A Love Letter to Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints" that kind of explains my transition out to my active family members and friends in a way that I hope resonates with them, and I think has. Because I think my mom's become a lot more comfortable with my no longer being active. I can't remember if it was Christmas this last year or the year before, but my folks moved to Hawaii about 5 years ago. And so I was home for Christmas, and we were out to breakfast one day, and the whole alcohol and coffee topic had never been explicitly breached before, but my mom, we were at breakfast and she said, you can order coffee if you want. I know you like it and everything, which sounds small, but was like really significant just because it was, I don't know, just very comforting to kind of get that stamp of approval from my mom. So both like while I was still active and as I went through my transition, my family has been wonderful and has always had my back. I loved my mission, and I still, despite no longer being active, look back fondly on my mission. I think in part just because of the relationships I built with a lot of my fellow missionaries, many of whom I'm still very good friends with today, and who know my position with the church. But I think one of the reasons my mission was so important in that regard is I think, as most return missionaries could tell you, you'll have companions and other missionaries that you don't quite get along with. And one of the best pieces of advice my dad gave me as a missionary was, if you have a companion who is kind of getting under your skin, you're probably getting under their skin just as much. And so that was, I don't know, kind of eye-opening. I think kind of helped me to see kind of this shared humanity that we all have. And I think helped me to be able to build better relationships with my companions. But one takeaway from that was I learned, especially on my mission, that I really value being able to choose who I surround myself with. And so on P days, when a bunch of missionaries would meet up and everything, I built friendships with a lot of missionaries who weren't my companions. And so I've got a few slides just of some of my favorite missionaries I served with, who I'm still friends with today. This is Elder O'Kang. He's from Uganda, and he and I still talk pretty frequently over Facebook. The 3 months that he and I were companions together were just like some of the best 3 months ever. He and I were both very dedicated to the work, loved having fun. And I mean, I think that attitude, that positivity that he exudes was kind of something that we share and both still share with each other, even though we're many time zones apart at this point. This is Elder Childs. He and I were never companions, but was one of the missionaries I served around quite a bit. And he knows I'm no longer active, but we keep in touch regularly. We actually just caught up by phone for a couple hours a week or so ago. Yeah, he's this is another picture of he and I with the Singh family, who is a family both of us served around in South Africa, and who have a daughter married in Utah now. And so they were in town visiting, and we got to go hang out in Zion with them, which was a lot of fun. This is Elder Esplin. Again, we were never companions, but lived in the same boarding for about 4.5 months, and we were the only 2 missionaries in that boarding that were diligent about working out every day. We got really serious about P90X and have maintained our friendship post-mission, and we'll call each other by phone every couple months and spend a couple hours picking up right where we left off. And I'm really grateful for his friendship, and he as well knows where I am with the church. This is a group of us, Riley, Tommy, and Morgan, and then me on the right. Nando's was a restaurant in South Africa that's starting to pop up in other places around the world, and it was a staple for us missionaries there. So this picture was, I think, 4 years ago, but I still keep in regular touch with them. Morgan and I were actually texting this morning about doing a half Ironman together next year. But this was the closest Nando's to Utah at the time was in Calgary, about a 12 or 13 hour drive away. And so the 4 of us decided to make a road trip out of it, drive up to Calgary, spend some time in Banff, drive over to Vancouver, spend a week together, and just had a awesome time. This is Riley and I together at Banff, just one of the most beautiful places in the world. And yeah, so I still have really good relationships with a lot of the missionaries I served with, and I still, I don't know, as I'm a member of the post-Mormon community, I still consider them kind of part of my Mormon bubble. And I mean, I think I would be friends with all of them independent of the church, but that's what ended up bringing us together. This photo, one of the best decisions I made while I was at Utah State was joining a fraternity. So this is some of my fraternity brothers at our brother Angel Lopez's wedding. And I wasn't totally sure about joining a fraternity my freshman year, but I talked to my dad about it, and he was surprisingly supportive of the idea. And one of the amazing things with this community is and this is probably unique to a fraternity at Utah State, but the group of guys that was in it was a really good group of active Mormons, ex-Mormons, and people who had never been Mormon. And so that ended up being really helpful, just because I felt kind of a sense of home, just like with active brothers at the time. And as I began going through my transition, I knew that I had brothers there that had similar questions and been through similar things, and that I knew I could confide in them in. And as I've been graduated a couple years now, and as I think back to the people that I most keep in touch with from college, it's my brothers in SIGEP. And so I have a few pictures just from some good times with them. This was a protest we went to on Utah State's campus supporting our immigrant brothers and sisters. This is my friends Eric and Glenn at a Nats game in DC. I had just moved out to DC. Eric was interning out here, and then our friend Glenn decided to come out for a few days and spend some time with us. This is kind of one of our mantras: go SIGEP, go Aggies, go Nats, go America. I guess all kind of communities in their own regard. This is Eric and I and our other brother Logan. For spring break one year, we decided we wanted to go to Iceland, and so we kind of kept watching flight prices. We figured they'd drop eventually, and once the price dropped to what we were willing to spend, we pulled the trigger on tickets and had an amazing week together. This is one of my very best friends, Bracken. He was my big in SIGEP. He actually lives out in the DC area with me, and was one of the first people that kind of talked me into first taking an internship in DC, after which I fell in love with the city and knew this was kind of where I wanted to come after I graduated. And he is active Mormon, but knows exactly where I am and is incredibly thoughtful, knows a lot of the ins and outs of why people leave, but he and his wife Haley are still in, and I love spending time with them. While I was at Utah State as well, I did a program called the Huntsman Scholars, which there was a group of about 25 of us, again, unintentionally, just kind of from all over the faith spectrum, from active Mormon to ex-Mormon to never having been Mormon. And our two professors, Shannon and John, did a really good job of kind of helping us all to be vulnerable with each other, accepting of each other, and kind of learning how to build on each other's strengths to kind of build a cohesive group. And I mean, other than SIGEP, this cohort of us is kind of the community I keep in most touch with since graduating. This was from kind of after our cohort had come together. We did a retreat up to Bear Lake, up in northern Utah, and this was us doing a polar plunge in Bear Lake, I think in February or March. It was crazy cold, but I mean, that was an experience that kind of bonded us together. We had done this thing that was very, very cold and unpleasant, but we all did it, and it was a good time. And this was, so part of our Huntsman Scholar semester that we did was a study abroad in Europe, and kind of similar to my Iceland trip with Logan and Eric, a few of us one year for spring break found really cheap tickets back to Europe, and 4 of us from our class decided to do a trip together. And so I think, like, one of the points I want to get at with this is Mormonism does not and should not have a monopoly on community. it was, like I mentioned kind of toward the beginning, it's one of those things that kept me in for a while just because I didn't want to lose the community that I had with my active family and friends. But as I was able to kind of navigate my journey safely, I found, you know, other senses of community. So I'll try and get through these last couple slides, but just some of my other friends that have just opened to doors to communities outside of Mormonism. This is my friend Jordan in the middle, who was in SIGEP with me and ended up doing a master's program in Ohio, which is only about a 6-hour drive from DC. So the last couple years I've gone out and visited him a couple times, and he's made new friends there. And I've gotten to know some of his friends in Ohio as well, which is, I don't know, kind of cool to me, just because my friendship with them now is entirely independent of my relationship to Mormonism. They're good people, just fun people to hang out with and keep in touch with. And it's no deeper than that. And one of the fun things kind of with one of my trips to Ohio is it wasn't too far out of the way to stop in Kirtland on the way back. And I think this is how I know that, like, Mormonism and like my cultural roots and history with Mormonism, I think for a while I kind of wanted to shy away from, but as of the last year or so have decided to really embrace. And getting to go to the Kirtland Temple and tour it was a really special experience. The Community of Christ does an amazing job just kind of managing it. And my tour guide at the time, one of the things he said that has stuck with me was he recognized that there are many different kind of denominations of Mormonism, but every one of those denominations has at least 14 years of shared history, and he kind of said that's what we're here to celebrate today, as we're at the Kirtland Temple. And so our tour group sang "The Spirit of God," which gave me chills just to get to sing that with a group of people in the building whose dedication W.W. Phelps wrote it for. So that was, I don't know, to me, kind of a way to celebrate my place in the Mormon community, having transitioned out of activity in it. This is a photo with some of my work colleagues at a retreat we went to that our Myanmar team hosted earlier this year, and they've been incredible. They kind of know my backstory with the church and have been have given me the space to kind of talk about it with people that don't really have experience with other Mormons, other than that one episode of South Park or that one really friendly Mormon kid they went to high school with. And so they're an amazing group of people that I guess like community that is entirely independent of the church. And then this is my kind of quarantine squad that I've been hanging out a lot with, as I've been trying to limit the in-person interactions. But it's just some of my friends out in DC who I am the only one among them that has ever been an active Mormon, and I consider them part of my community as well. So I'll close with a point I made at the beginning, which is that I really want to drive home, is that community is what kept me active in the church for as long as it did. Community is what allowed me to navigate my faith journey safely as I went through my transition, and communities both within and without Mormonism have catalyzed my being able to thrive since my transition, and be able to kind of celebrate my Mormon heritage and that community, even though I've abandoned my belief in the in kind of the core tenets of Mormonism. So I'll leave it with that, and I guess we go over to the Q&A now.
Thanks so much, Dallin. Thank you, Anthony and Nick, for sharing your experiences with community leadership and sharing lots of resources and helping us brainstorm ideas about how we can find community as individuals transition in and out of Mormonism. We do have time for one question before we wrap up. And here's what the questioner, or what question I've got here on the screen. Don't people going through a faith crisis often land in a void or no man's land, a kind of in-between or transitional place? The questioner notes that you don't always know your new community right away. What advice would you give to this individual about helping someone who finds themselves in that void or no man's land start to identify their new community?
I think it's a great question. I think looking specifically at the aspect of like not knowing your new community right away, I think that's part of the lesson that you learn. I think that's part of it is you test things out, and sometimes it doesn't work out and sometimes it does, and then you build out what what community is going to mean to you moving forward. I feel like when you're in the church, the community is very, very kind of prescribed to you. Your ward is your community, your quorum, your stake, whatever it is, that's your community. So then when you go outside of that, you have to, you feel around, you find where those edges are for you. It's a lot of trial and error for almost everybody. I think that's just kind of like my first point. I'm sure someone will have something that speaks to the rest of it better.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Oh, are you sure? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's very common that when we go through a faith transition, we don't really know. It's not just a faith crisis for some people, it's an identity crisis. And so this is like the question, like in the same day or in the same hour, a person could feel unsettled about where they fit individually and in a community. It's all part of the awakening of realizing that you really are on solid ground, that you have the same core connective kinds of values that you've already had, but that you've always had, but trying to figure out how to reorient and connect those to different senses of meanings and groups. And so I think what helped me was attending Sunstone and getting familiar and having discussions with people at the Sunstone Symposium. It was participating in online groups, like some of the ones that Nick is in and some of the ones that Nick has been excommunicated from. And it's seeing if you can find a local group, if it's a weekend meetup, like a coffee house Sunday morning meetup, like I showed on Ex-Mormon Reddit, or if it's a Mormon Spectrum group or a Thrive group, or if it's going to a Thrive conference. There are large communities in Utah County and in the Phoenix area and in Eastern Idaho and so forth. So it's being able to sit with people and trying to figure out how to kind of reorient yourself in things, but it's absolutely a transitional place and it takes time. One thing that I heard when I was going through it was that on average it takes about 18 months to process grief, at least 18 months. So, and then I remember a podcast episode where John Larson indicated that for every one solid decade that you spent very Orthodox believing in the church, it's going to take at least 1 year post-Orthodoxy to feel like you're yourself again and reorient things. And I went through my faith transition when I was 49, and sure enough, right at about 4 years is where I really began to feel like I was myself again and not as much in a transitional place. So it's just being patient and seeking out resources and listening to Brené Brown and reading secular Buddhism and Eckhart Tolle and things like that. So, Dallin?
Yeah, I'd echo similar thoughts. And I think this is one area of my journey where I feel really fortunate. Was just Utah State University was a really great place for me. I think just by virtue of it being a university in Utah that had a really big active Mormon population, but not entirely Mormon, kind of allowed me to seek out and find probably more individuals rather than groups of people who had been down similar paths to me. And I don't know, a lot of my sense of community, I feel like I found in individuals who I could relate to and not feel lonely as I was going through my journey. And I think I don't know, one of the tougher parts of moving out to DC after I graduated was there was almost like a crippling fear of like, I know like one person in that city. I'm probably not going to see him a whole lot. And so I remember posting on, I think it was one of the Facebook groups, like, hey, I'm moving out to DC. Are there any fellow like post-Mormons or anything out there? Just kind of like trying to find other people on similar paths. And one of my this was actually funny. One of my friends from my fraternity replied to me in the group, and I had no idea that he and I were on the same paths. But he lives out here, and we hang out a lot now. And so I don't know. I feel like part of it is, and granted, I don't think there are any black and white answers, just because I mean, every one of us is taking a unique journey, and we can learn from each other. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're all going down our own individual paths. But like for me, what's worked and really helped is just kind of like seeking out people who are at similar places as I am, and just kind of trying to build community with them. And so like earlier on in my journey, that was generally people who were also pretty in the weeds on faith transitions. But that's Anthony's point about decades kind of corresponding to years it takes to transition out. I feel like I probably landed about at a place where I was really comfortable with myself outside of an active Mormon context, probably close to 2 years after I decided to withdraw from activity. And I've gotten to the point now where, I don't know, I find community in, I'm big into music, and I love going to concerts, which has been one of the downsides of the pandemic, is not being able to go to as many concerts as I used to. But a lot of the times I'll go to concerts on my own and just make friends with people I'm standing to next in the crowd. And I mean, people that I still stay friends with and keep in touch with today. It's kind of cool because like fans of a band or an artist, or I mean, even sports teams, despite all of the other differences that you may have, you share like a love for that artist or their music, or a sports team or something. And you can find community in that regard. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that totally answers, but kind of finding community in where you're at. And Facebook groups are a good way to do that, especially during the pandemic. But yeah.
Thank you guys for sharing that. I think it's helpful for people to hear what a realistic timeline is to feeling yourself again after a difficult faith transition. That's certainly, I think that's certainly helpful. And to think about looking in communities where you already have another interest that isn't religious, to find new community. Thank you again for supporting Sunstone by participating. We appreciate your contributions here. Nick and Anthony and Dallin, thank you very much for being here, and thank you listeners for being here. As a reminder, this presentation will be available on the Whova app from now to the end of the year, or at least by the end of September, end of August. I'm not sure. I've gotten conflicting information whether it's today or end of August when it begins, but this presentation will be available in the Whova app for you to listen to again. Thanks again so much, and with that, we'll go ahead and end this session.